Coming up next on the SPNN Forum, we have Ward 4 City Council Member Mitra Jalali. Hi, welcome to the SPNN Forum. I'm Martin Ludden, the Executive Director of the St. Paul Neighborhood Network, and we're here today with Mitra Jalali, the Ward 4 City Council Member for St. Paul. Mitra, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So thanks for joining us. And can you start and just tell us a little bit about the geographical boundaries of Ward 4?
Yes, so I'm really proud to represent Ward 4, one of 7 wards, city council wards across St. Paul. I think of my ward as like the upper left corner, like large corner of St. Paul. It's the northwest region. It includes the heart of the Hamlin Midway neighborhood, about half of Como, like kind of the west side of the lake, the neighborhoods of St. Anthony Park, Marion Park, and Union Park, and then just a little bit of Matt Groveland toward the south. And then if you keep going further south past St. Clair Avenue, most of that then becomes Ward 3 and Highland and the rest of Matt Grove. So to give you a little bit of geography, I represent a very diverse set of neighborhoods and a rapidly changing part of the city too. And so I actually ran in part because I wanted to help empower our community to drive that change and not feel like we're reacting to it and to grow our city equitably. So I'm excited to be here, and I've been in this job now since 2018. So it's, I'm not new anymore. For a long time, I felt like it was like sprint, and you know, now we're just in a whole new reality. So I'm excited to catch up with you and really appreciate all that you guys do here at SPNN.
Well, you're in a pair of new realities, or 3 new realities. I mean, there's, it's hard to put a number on it right now, but so you're in your first full term.
My first full term, yep,
Yeah.
yep.
And then we're also dealing with, you know, any number of kind of uprisings and revolutions locally, and then, you know, COVID pandemic globally. And, so I guess how is the business of the council in that mix, and as you're settling into a full term?
Well, it's just been a very challenging year. I think we're all living through such a difficult time, and I think it is perhaps more tough than ever to be in local government, and also we are the front line and have been for so much of what our community needs right now. You know, it's the cities and counties that are running essential services and really regulating the spaces, public, private, or otherwise, that people can move throughout and the services people use. It's our partners at the county who administer a lot of the emergency funds that help people with rental assistance and with public health response. And so we're just in it. And I feel like I have been more challenged than ever as a leader. There are things that I've done this year in my job I never imagined I would have to do as a council member, even as someone who comes from a background in organizing, has done frontline community support work, has lived through a lot of the things I try to campaign on now. I mean, it's still like I could never have foreseen kind of what we've gone through, and I'm happy to talk about like what the impacts of some of that has been and how it shapes our work the rest of the year. But we're in what the last few days have been, I think, like quieter summer days, and it's just given me a little bit of space to think about like where have we been through this year, and then what do we have to do, because it's just there's so much work ahead of us. So
you talked about kind of your background in organizing, and I think can you talk about what that means? Like, what is organizing and how does it drive some of this work that's happening?
Yeah, well, I have come to understand organizing as a means to build power for public purpose. So I think at its very heart and in the fabric of the work, organizing is about building relationships. And through the process of building those relationships, what you want to do is build the power and capacity of grassroots people all across community, who then collectively form an ecosystem that facilitates change. And in certain contexts, this is a very clear structure. Like, we're all familiar with election cycles and electoral cycles where people build up campaigns, they activate neighborhood networks, they coalesce around candidates, and then they run on like their policies and beliefs. And then the product of that organizing is elected decision makers who you have a relationship with and you work with, and you're like through the relationship of that person's time in office, you have this like group of people, right? I don't know anyone who has like really succeeded in the type of job I do now who hasn't been able to be really rooted in community and that ecosystem of relationships that really like do that work of what co-governing is. It's very hard. And sometimes people think organizing is just mobilizing, like just getting people to come out to do one thing and sort of like activating people around one little task. And I think it's a lot deeper than that. It's like, I know people in our community who I have known through multiple jobs and stages of life for like 10 years now. And when stuff really started going down in the fallout of Memorial Day weekend, I was getting calls from like people I've known from all kinds of circumstances. And we have this like network of relationships where that, like, I got a call from someone who knows someone who like needed to help a Black mom get home in like the most terrifying nights of the year when there were like scary people in our community, like wielding, like, this is a literal thing that happened, is an organizer who knows another person who was like running a safe house in Longfellow had that they reached out to me at a very late hour because a mom who lives in Midway and who is Black and has children with her was kind of like stuck outside after curfew and like didn't, like the curfew kind of got rolled out and she was still at work and was sort of stuck after leaving work, right, and had her children with her. And myself and school board director Chantel Allen and this organizer, a couple other folks who all know each other, just created a little like pod of people who helped her travel between a few different houses to eventually just like try to get home on a very terrifying night where she was like beside herself, not sure what to do. And like, if we don't have those relationships, like those things like all add up to something that in the most severe and extreme form creates safety for people. And so I've just like seen the fruits of like all of the like work and relationships and organizing that a lot of us across our community have done through multiple different battles that a lot of maybe never even directly related to each other are suddenly now we're like all being called upon. And you can like tell, like, I think a crisis moment is a test of the organizing you have or have not done, because like if electeds, for example, people in my position are trying to make these like very high stakes, rapidly evolving choices, and they do not have like a well and a reservoir of like community folks to go to say, we're thinking of doing XYZ. Do you think there would be like equity impacts to that or other things we should think about? You're just making choices in the dark. So I think it's like this complex ongoing process. There is both art and science to it. There really is. And you can't only do the art side and you can't only do the science side. It's really just, it's both. So I hope this is making sense, but it's greatly been on my mind. It's really important.
So how, I mean, that's like, yes, the work you're talking about and that organizing and that being in and among your community is part of your job as a council member. But kind of to the like official business of the council, what have you guys been working on and how does it look different in this, mix that we're in right now than it would otherwise?
Yeah, well, one thing that has consumed a lot of my year, in addition to everything that we've been responding to, is that we have been undergoing a process to pass a comprehensive tenant protections ordinance for well over a year now. Like, since the second I got to the council, actually, there were pieces kind of in motion, and it has finally culminated. And we passed a full ordinance that was even stronger, actually, than the original one we kind of started out with early in I think early March, late February when it first got introduced. And it was really wild even through that process to like have a press conference with community partners and our deputy mayor and all kinds of media and just be like doing business as usual. And then within 2 weeks, we had to shut everything down. And we moved, like we were going to have a public hearing for tenant protections on April 1st. And we had to like lay this entire ordinance over indefinitely. Not indefinitely, but like very significantly, at least a couple of months. We couldn't do hearings in person. We couldn't do meetings in person. A lot of the legislative process is like going to groups of people or them coming to you so they can talk about, here's my story and why renter protections would really help me in my life. We didn't get to do any of that. So it was like being on a million calls. It was hours of coordinating to do like virtual engagement. It was having a virtual public hearing, the first that I don't think the city of St. Paul has ever had virtual public hearings in any way as like a matter of public record. And we finally did, because we had to adapt this year. And we actually did the first one on the conversion therapy ban, which we successfully passed, which was a really great thing to do during Pride Month. And then we had one for this ordinance. And we have a lot that we're working on that we'll have to work on with our budget. Our budget cycle is every year from August to December.
Okay.
And so the fast, like typical what we do is that in August, the mayor proposes a budget, and that kind of kicks off a round of department presentations to the council, where planning and public works and police and fire and everyone, like one at a time, come and do a presentation and say, of the mayor's proposed budget, here's our component. You can ask us a bunch of questions. Here's what we're aspiring to do. And we just digest it. We like digest it for months.
Yeah.
We're going to have like just a whole new reality on our hands. I mean, when you think about the economic repercussions of the pandemic, we don't have a lot of the revenue streams that we normally help fund our city with. The hotel and sales tax and lodging taxes that come through from like normal event use, most of that's not happening. So that money has to come from somewhere, and usually it's the general fund. There's a lot of fees that we waived as an equity imperative because businesses or folks using their cars or getting towed or whatever number of fees, right, that all kind of like these little like minuscule processes that total in the millions of like how we fund our stuff.
Yeah. They're
just like not happening, or we waived them because people needed to be able to afford their life in the pandemic. And it was a way that the city could relent a little. Right. But now we need to figure out that. And then the CARES Act money from the federal government, I have a PDF in my inbox that's like, here's what you can use it on, here's what you can't. And there's just a lot of stuff we can't use it on. Yeah. Not that like any money shouldn't come with restrictions, but we're still going to have a hole to fill. You know, the federal, I keep wanting to say stimulus money. I know that's not actually the right term. The coronavirus response money, emergency funding, is not going to absorb everything we've incurred. So there will be a lot to do with that. And that's kind of just around the corner. And we're talking, you know, across the river, my colleagues are talking about figuring out how to defund police and refund like actual violence prevention and community safety. And I think you're going to see these conversations like really connect in a powerful way, in a way that I think will I believe it will be challenging and important. So
do you have any sense yet for kind of as a percentage or as a number what the shortfall is going to be?
I don't know the latest, because it kind of feels like every week and month we get a new configuration with money that comes online from the state and the feds. But, you know, I expect it to be anywhere from like 10 to 25 million. I mean, it would probably be pretty significant shortfall. And I have slowly over 2 budget cycles gotten a better handle on what $1 million means in a city budget, right, what 2 million is, what 5 million is, what 30 million is, what 100 million is. So if you like, I remember getting sworn in 2018, and like I was sworn in at 9:00 a.m. and at 10:00 a.m. I like went to a budget hearing, and it felt like I was like swimming in numbers that I had no scale for. And I specifically remember like we were all like excited in the hallway and eating cake, and Chris Tolbert was like, "We have to go to work now." Yeah. And then it was like this like super intense like presentation on how much a fire engine costs. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of what the job actually is. It's like these additive things, like the costs of running a city are like making choices about, if this type of pothole exists, do we send like 2 people out every single time to go fix it, or do we send 4? And like, how do you balance like safety and service and cost and all these things? Right. Yeah. So we're like working the reason we take so long to digest the budget is to understand, with parks, right? Like, where have we incurred costs from a lot of the services parks provided this year? Because, we worked with SPPS to like absorb the needs of youth in our community. Right. And, you know, how do we total, like, parks wasn't running a lot of programs this year because it wasn't safe to. Well, families pay for a lot of those services with fees, and we're not doing the programs.
Yeah.
But we still have staff that are doing work that our community needs us to do.
Right.
So I don't mean to ramble and go on and on. It's just that it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Well, I think that, like, when we think, well, for one thing, I think most of us also don't have any kind of context on, like, what is $25 million, especially, in relation to the city budget. What's the total budget for the city of St. Paul?
I want to say it's $600 million,
Okay.
and I can double check that. But yeah.
So in that, in that ballpark,
Yep.
most of us will never see that much money.
Yeah, and what does it even mean, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, and depending on the issue you're talking about, $1 million would either be like a game-changing amount of money, or it would be like nothing. Like, it's gone because you already owe it based on the issue you're talking about. So yeah, I think we will see like some kind of double-digit shortfall. I'm hoping it's more like in the low 10s and 20s versus the I really shouldn't say the 10s in there because I feel like we're just, but I'm like open-minded, right? Because if we continue to like see movement from state and federal assistance as this goes on, and there's just gonna be public need, and we're gonna have to work with our partners in every level of government to give our communities what they need. But our council at the end of the day is gonna work with our mayor and our community on how to get through this year from a budget standpoint. It's gonna be rough, and it's also, I think, a chance to say, what are we really like willing to prioritize in very difficult time. So just easy things for the rest of the year, Martin, like just low stakes, uncomplicated local stuff.
Yeah. But I think that's, and these kind of overlapping crises have shown a really bright light on that, to say that, I think, like federal electoral politics take up so much room, so much oxygen in that conversation that I think people oftentimes lose sight of kind of the work that happens at the local level, and especially like the city, yes, and the county, maybe even more so. But how much of that really day-to-day touch on individual residents comes from city and county services and not federal at all. Yeah,
and in addition to the services, I mean, our city council and city government shape like the built environment of our community. I mean, it's figuring out what to do with commercial lots or parkland or spaces that, like, right now take one form, but there's a chance to make it repurposed to maybe serve a better purpose, or maybe there's projects that are at odds with like what our community really needs right now, and how do we shape them and improve them. I mean, the development, land use, and planning parts of our city structure, and there is kind of like a county piece to it too, but we like basically with community shape the sort of tax base and ecosystem of goods and services and jobs and things that like help people live here, like help people afford their life. I think I have been very vocal since becoming a local elected official about like transit and transit access, which are they're not things that we oversee, but we work with Metro Transit and we work with our state delegation to like fight for transit funding and ways to get around besides cars. And the city role in that is like, we can make our regulations better so we don't require that you like have to have a car to get by in Minnesota. We can just plan a community where you can walk to stuff or move to stuff with your wheelchair, or if you use a mobility device. We could really just do that. And that's like, I mean, that's everyday people life stuff. So I do feel like some of the most profound and like significant long-term things that impact our community get figured out in like super boring public meetings that nobody watches locally. But I personally feel like I represent an area of our community that's like highly engaged and has a strong like spirit of civic participation. I think that's great. We need to make it easier for everyone to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely. How you mentioned a little bit earlier, talking about the tenant protection ordinance that you passed, that we have it's a first in the nation. Did you call it a just cause
Just cause
notification?
notice, yeah.
Can you talk,
Yep.
like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So I am careful to say just cause notice. Other states have different state tenant laws, and so there you might hear some people call it just cause eviction. But in Minnesota, evictions are governed by a state process that we can't preempt or interfere with as a city. What we can do is create a regulation locally that would simply ask that if you are on a month-to-month or annual or any kind of lease as a renter, that if your landlord is not renewing you, that they simply provide in writing a reason for the non-renewal. And you can always, as a tenant, choose to exit or rent elsewhere. The ordinance outlines, here's the 10 defined just causes. They conform with state law, like non-payment of rent, even in places, I guess I'll say, like, even in communities across the country with no matter what their state laws are or the nature of the ordinance, like where there are just cause laws and tenant protections, renters nationally continue to be non-renewed or formally evicted for non-payment of rent because people just can't afford rent. Like, it's just very
Right.
costly to be able to afford your life from a housing standpoint in America. It's just like a huge problem. And so it's not like we got some feedback throughout the process. It just goes way too far. And it's like the other side of that feedback is this doesn't do enough. Like, frankly, we heard from a lot of folks that there's still a whole bunch of layers of issues on top of this we're going to need to solve around affordability and rental assistance in a pandemic. I was really happy to see the announcement from Governor Walz today and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan that we're finally going to be able to reallocate some CARES Act money to like actually just help people afford to pay rent after being like unemployed for months and struggling to make ends meet. So just cause notice simply says give a reason why you're not renewing. And really what this aims to address is arbitrary non-renewals. So for example, there are tenants who have called my office because they got a notice to vacate, and they got a notice to vacate within a few days of like having some relatives over who were loud. And before that, they'd had like no issues at all. And suddenly we're like hit with essentially a displacement, like you cannot live here anymore. And they were freaked out, and we had to like figure out what was going on with the landlord and involve community partners to kind of like facilitate the conversation. And that is like the reality of power in the rental market right now. It's not with the tenant. It's just not. It's a landlord's market. There's a 2% vacancy rate across Minneapolis and St. Paul. That is extremely low. National data tells us that you want like a 5 or above % vacancy rate for like healthy, normal market affordability. And we're behind in the Twin Cities. The cost of living has gone up. The cost of housing has gone up. We're struggling. And so we need these protections so that people are not arbitrarily put out of their home, so they have a fighting shot at being able to stay. And the people who are on month-to-month leases in our community, the ones that are most vulnerable to arbitrary non-renewals, are also more likely to experience discrimination in the first place, more likely to have other destabilizing factors. I mean, it's working folks, low wealth residents, people of color, disproportionately Black and brown people in St. Paul. So I talk about like renters a lot, but that can sometimes be like a faceless term. But we're talking about this is a racial equity imperative policy. And so so that's a little more about why we have it. But no other city in Minnesota has passed a just cause notice ordinance. So we're leading, and people like to think we follow Minneapolis, and I would respectfully say that our ordinance is stronger than theirs is. So so I just needed to take my minute to make sure we know that. But
there is always
there's a lot of work
on the SPNN forum for some St. Paul exceptionalism.
Yeah. Well, and we just don't really like make a big deal out of it. So folks don't know that we're quietly over here just like crushing it. But
what are some of the other key points to that tenant protection plan?
So it would also, there is a part that like parallels and aligns with what Minneapolis did last year, which is that it reforms tenant screening criteria. So you can no longer, it sort of lays out specifications and best practices for using tenants' previous criminal credit or rental history. The common example given is that people could have bad credit but a stellar rental payment history, because if you are poor and you have to finance your life in all kinds of ways that result in you having bad credit, I mean, even with situations like that, data consistently shows the number one payment people make first is rent, because they don't want to be out on the street. People want to be able to live
Right.
in a home. So if someone has great rental payment history, you can't exclude them on basis of their credit score. That's something that will now be possible under the ordinance. There are a lot of like old offenses that people have as part of the criminalization of poverty, or just the reality of like being in a situation where you are more exposed to like crime or survival behavior that doesn't actually reflect like your full capacity as a person, or if you're returning from incarceration, like you actually need housing the most. Like that is the top predictor in whether or not you will continue to offend, is like awkward language, but you know, it's like people who are returning from the trauma of prison like actually really need access to housing, and people are consistently unwilling to rent to folks with a criminal background. So it like lays out, here's like actually how to avoid using people's criminal history against them for like these types of offenses. And so tenant rights and responsibilities is in there, just cause notice, security deposit cap, the screening reform. And then the most important, or not most important, but like I think it is very, very timely, I would say, is an advance notice of sale policy that is meant to address the increasing problem in our community and other cities where basically your building could get sold out from under you if you are a tenant in our community, and you basically have like 30 days to leave because somebody else owns your building now and is your landlord. So what it does is it institutes a 90-day notice where anyone trying to sell their property for eligible qualifying rental buildings has to notify the city of St. Paul and give 90 days notice of the sale. Lots of times our partners in the sort of like preservation and nonprofit affordable housing space don't have enough time in the market to put together the financing that would like help them intervene in a situation like that and try to like get a shot at the building and come up with a deal that everyone can work with that keeps tenants there. So it gives time in the market for that type of possible intervention. It gives time to the tenants living there. And lastly, if you don't get the 90 days, or if they're trying to put you out sooner, or you are displaced like after the sale through a rent hike, it would entitle you to relocation assistance in a formula the ordinance lays out. So
Gotcha.
it's like time and or actual money, like support to relocate. That's a really powerful policy. And I think it helps lay the foundation for like, there's a legislative trend around the country of tenant opportunity to purchase policies, giving renters the chance to buy their buildings. And it is hard to organize your fellow renters to consider pooling your resources and like
Right.
get a possible chance to buy your building from your landlord. I mean, that's like a huge missing part of the like wealth building and ownership equation of programs and policies we just don't really have built out well in America. So this is not only an important part of the policy we have right now to like help people who are facing their building possibly being sold right now, but it is, I think, groundwork for future policy that will also matter a lot as our community grows and changes. So that's the tenant protections ordinance. That's what we did last week. We passed it on July, when was Wednesday last week? July 8th? We took a final vote. We passed it 7-0. It was pretty awesome.
Nice. Well, I think, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah,
Councilmember
definitely.
Jalali, and thank you so much for the work you're doing and the organizing that you're doing. And I don't know if you call it legislating at a city level, but for the work you're doing there.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to get to do this. I feel like if we were in normal times, I'd get to be at SPNN a lot more. And so I'm happy that we got the chance to check in, and really appreciate the way that you all have continued to show up for our community. We just really need what you're doing right now. So thank you.
Well, thanks for that. This has been the SPNN Forum, and we've been here with Ward 4 Councilmember Mitra Jalali. Tune in again next time, and we'll see you then. Thanks.